On January 18, 2012, a massive online protest was held that reached into the lives and computers of everyone with internet access. On that day, many websites shut down their pages in order to protest the Stop Online Piracy and Protect Online Threats to Economic Creativity and Theft of Intellectual Property Acts, also known as SOPA and PIPA. Notable sites included Google, a search engine, Wikipedia, an online encyclopedia, and Reddit.com, a pop culture blog site. Essentially what these pages did was present a blacked out version of their page, along with the description of the acts, a link to sign a petition, and contact information for a person's local representatives. It was, all in all, 10 million people signed the petition, and 8 million people contacted their representatives. This was an unprecedented turnout, especially considering the fact that it happened over the course of 48 hours. So what am I here to do? I wish to explore online piracy, specifically by seeking to expose the motivations of those who either support or oppose anti-piracy legislation. Through examining the attitudes and viewpoints on both sides, I hope to elucidate society's true stakes in the debate in order to illustrate the parameters needed to reach a feasible solution. I will do this first by giving you some background information. Then I'll talk about the rhetorical approaches used. Then I'll discuss the economics of the debate and conclude with my solution. But first, we must define online piracy. Joe Carriganis from the Social Science Research Council defines piracy as the ubiquitous, increasingly digital practices of copying that fall outside the boundaries of copyright law. Mostly I'll be talking about music piracy for the purposes of my presentation. Now what's interesting is that much of the tension in the debate comes from the differences that both sides have in their definition of piracy. When those who support the SOPA and PIPA discuss the bills, when they discuss piracy, they speak about it as a practice that causes negative financial loss, negative financial impact via the theft of intellectual property. When people who oppose SOPA and PIPA talk about piracy, the discussion centers around the importance of having a free and open internet where freedom of speech and expression thrive. So now that I've defined the key terms, let's look at the bills in depth. Both bills are very similar, so I'll talk about them interchangeably. PIPA was introduced by Senator Patrick Leahy and seeks to protect intellectual property on the internet by giving the Department of Justice the authority to take action against a domain name used by an internet site that is dedicated to infringing activities. Both bills are very aggressive in what they allow the DOJ to do. First, the Department of Justice can mandate internet service providers they can mandate them to block access to these sites. Second, they can force payment and advertising services from doing business with these sites. And lastly, they can force search engines to not provide links to these sites. So now we know what the bills are, let's look at some of the key players. According to The Economist, pro-SOPA interest groups donated $130 million to members of the House and Senate, while the anti-camp only gave $44 million. Just so we're clear, Christian Science Monitor listed the top 3 SOPA and PIPA supporters as the Motion Picture Association of America, the Recording Industry Association of America, and Pfizer, the drug company. Just to show how meaningful these acts were to those who supported the bills, former Senator Chris Dodd, now the president of the Motion Picture Association of America, threatened to pull Hollywood's support of the Obama administration because of the stance that the White House took on the bills. The administration didn't support the bills. I'm not saying this to pass judgment on the political system that we have nowadays, but just to show you how important these bills were to the people who supported it, and I'm trying to find out why it was so important to them. So now we know what the bills are and who the key players are. Let's look at some rhetoric and some reactions to the bill. Kerry Sherman, the president of the RIAA, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in which he discussed the bills and talked a lot about the economic burden that piracy places on his industry every year. It was very similar in structure to other articles who were in favor of these bills. Essentially, they use very economically rooted rhetoric in their discussion. For example, he noted that music sales in the United States are less than half of what they were in 1999. So obviously the finances are an issue for him. On the other hand, Reddit.com said that the acts were overly broad mechanisms for the enforcement of copyright, which would restrict innovation. And Google said that the bills would censor the web. In summary, the language they used revolved around freedom, censorship, and protection of creativity. There really were no finances mentioned. So now that we've looked at the bills, we've looked at key players, and we've looked at reactions, let's look at the finances. And we'll start with Google, who didn't want to mention them previously. Susan Crawford, a visiting professor at Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard Law School, noted that Google relies on user-generated content like links, pages, and reactions in order to thrive. As an intermediary, Google does not want to be conscripted as an automatic enforcer of other people's copyrights. What this means is that Google doesn't want to have to block things from their, they don't want to have to censor anything because this is the way they make money through links and pages. So obviously we can see that money is not only an issue for those who supported the bills. On the day of the, just to illustrate this, on the day of the shutdown, Google, Google, as a for-profit company, did not shut down their page, while Wikipedia, a non-profit company, did shut down their page. This shows that the different, Google didn't, since Google had more of a financial stake, they didn't shut down their page, and this shows that the finances really were an issue for them, even though they didn't talk about it. So now let's see what's going on with the economics on the other side of the debate. Two economists at Harvard and University of Kansas wrote a very influential paper in which they tried to find whether or not the decrease in music sales is the fault of online piracy, and they couldn't determine this one way or another. They couldn't determine that it was the fault of online piracy. They also found that there's no evidence that file sharing has discouraged the production of artistic works. In fact, Joe Waldfogel, an economist with the National Bureau of Economic Research, noted that complementary goods to music, like concerts, have increased, while interest in music in general has also increased. He also found that social welfare has increased because people can now access music for a price that they wouldn't have been willing to pay before. Instead of having to buy a $20 album, they can get it for free. However, the problem is that this shift in social welfare and this increase has come from groups like the RIAA and to individual consumers. So obviously, there's a disconnect here. Maybe the reason we can't find a solution is that the RIAA really isn't interested in property rights and is more concerned about their bottom line. This brings me to the solutions portion of my talk. Where do we go from here? We need an attitude adjustment. All of the papers and articles that I have read blame the other side for our inability to pass effective anti-piracy legislation. I have found a complete lack of either side willing to compromise, and this is where I enter into the conversation. Two criminologists at Florida Atlantic University and University of Louisville argued that it may be more constructive to attempt to counter the cognitive, behavioral, psychological, and sociological influences of music piracy, along with the implementation of reactive technological solutions. What this means to me is that changing attitudes is really at the heart of this problem that we have. We've seen that Google and Wikipedia have the ability to really shape people's thoughts about the debate. However, Sherman, the president of the RIAA, who I mentioned earlier, argued that because Google and Wikipedia are large sources of information for a lot of people on the web, that they should follow the principle of net neutrality, which is that internet service providers shouldn't show their political thoughts. And he argued that since Google and Wikipedia are heavily used by a lot of people and just sources of information, they also should not have or promoted their political beliefs. So if you follow his logic, what they did was unethical. But they could correct their attitudes and foster a new culture that really cares about intellectual property, that cares about the rights of the music industry, and that also is concerned about our freedoms on the web. They have the ability to do this. There's hope that Google recently wrote the Open Act, which is their reaction to SOPA and HIPAA. I don't have time to talk about it now, but it's showing that they're willing to compromise. And also that the music industry, we've seen the advent of services like Pandora and Spotify, which allow people to access music for free instead of having to steal it. So there's still this increase in social welfare without it being taken away from the RIAA. But we need to do more. To show how important it is to reach a solution, let's look at some of the implications. On one hand, we could see the end of the music industry as we know it. And on the other hand, we could see an internet that is like a lot of people feared on the day of the shutdown. Heavily censored, and similar to people are saying we're going to turn into the next China, so with all their stuff that they have going on. So it's very important that we reach a solution. Although we can't eliminate online piracy in its entirety, we need something that can effectively decrease the amount of online piracy so that both sides are happy without compromising our freedoms on the web. And that will require compromise from both sides, and it will require both sides to admit to their true motivations. This is where my research has led me, and it is my contribution. We need both sides to be open and to tell the truth. Thank you.